Welcome to our lesson on whole interval, partial interval, and momentary time sampling. This is original BCBA exam practice, not official BACB exam content. We will first define what counts as yes, then connect the scoring rule to bias and fit, and then work through 15 scenario questions. The point is not to memorize 3 names. It is to ask what one score represents, what can happen between checks, and whether the method preserves the dimension the decision requires. Our free BCBA mock exam is waiting on screen. Because the same behavior stream can produce different percentages when the observer changes what counts as yes. Whole interval recording requires the behavior for the entire interval. Partial interval recording counts any occurrence. Momentary time sampling checks only a scheduled instant. These 15 scenarios move from the scoring rule to measurement bias, observation feasibility, interval length, and the difference between sampled presence and direct temporal measurement. They train us to name the denominator and the observation rule before interpreting a percentage. That prevents the common error of treating equal percentages as equivalent or treating a snapshot as continuous observation. This is a focused concept plus questions lesson, not a complete review of every task in the published outline. The scoring rule decides what yes means. The percentage is not self-interpreting. The observer's rule creates the data relation. Same behavior stream is not equal to same percentage meaning. Yes only if behavior lasts the entire interval. A brief interruption makes the interval. No strict scoring typically underestimates percentage duration. Yes if behavior occurs at any point. One brief event can produce a yes. Broad scoring typically overestimates percentage duration. 3 observers can score one interval differently. Mark the observation window before deciding whether the behavior earns a yes. Ask when the observer is allowed to say yes. Whole behavior for the entire interval. Partial behavior at any point. Moment behavior at the scheduled instant. Compare same stream, different score. Interpret the number only after naming its denominator. A matching percentage does not make 2 methods interchangeable. The method tells you what the percentage can support. Decision whole/partial interval. Momentary time sampling yes means entire interval/any occurrence behavior at scheduled instant. What it estimates: sampled interval occurrence, sample presence at checks. Common risk strict versus broad duration bias events missed or sampled repeatedly. Exam move name the interval rule, name the check moment. Choose the method that preserves the needed dimension. Sampling can be efficient, but a brief or safety-critical response may require direct observation. Feasibility matters, but it cannot erase the decision's measurement need. Directly measures count, rate, duration, latency, or inter-response time, preserves each relevant occurrence or temporal dimension, requires enough observation capacity. Samples intervals or scheduled moments can be practical across many learners, may not preserve exact count or time. Use a 4-step measurement check. When a stem is crowded, turn it into a decision sequence. Choose the rule from the decision, not from the percentage alone. 1. What behavior dimension matters? 2. What does one yes or count represent? 3. What can a method miss or overcount? 4. Does the method fit the decision? Interval length and behavior pattern change the error. A sampling method is not a magic label. Its accuracy depends on how checks meet the behavior stream. Method choice and sampling design travel together. Target duration, rate, or occurrence, interval length, and distribution pattern. Brief, long, frequent, or rare decision, what the data must support. A usable measure links rule, observer, and decision. The procedure is only defensible when observers can apply it consistently and the resulting data answer the clinical question. A clean percentage still needs a clear scoring relation. Define right the observable target score. Apply 1 clear observation rule. Check assess agreement and implementation. Interpret use the data only within their limits. The distractors confuse the number with the rule. The best answer names what the method actually observed and what the decision requires. Name the rule, identify the bias, then decide whether the data fit. Percent is not equal to duration. A percentage does not automatically equal exact time. Whole is not equal to any whole interval requires the complete interval. Moment is not equal to interval. A scheduled check ignores what happens between checks. Feasible is not equal to valid. Practical sampling still needs a defensible fit. Rule: first interpret after naming what yes means. Before the first question, use 4 passes. Isolate the clue that changes the decision. Name the relation, history, measure, implementation issue, or sequence being tested. Test every option against that clue, rejecting any answer that adds missing evidence or solves a different problem. Then state the portable rule in your own words. We will read the complete stem and all 4 options, pause before the reveal, announce the correct answer once, and explain every distractor in relation to this exact case. Question 1. During class, a teacher looks up only when a timer sounds every 60 seconds and records whether a student is on task at that exact moment. Which procedure is used? A. Whole interval recording. B. Partial interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Duration recording. Pause and name the decisive relation before you choose. Choose C. Momentary time sampling. Observation occurs only at the scheduled instant. Momentary time sampling scores whether behavior is occurring at the check moment. The trap is that exact scheduled check equals momentary time sampling. A. Whole interval requires behavior throughout the interval. B. Partial interval monitors any occurrence during the interval. D. Duration measures how long behavior lasts. Exact scheduled check equals momentary time sampling. Question 2. A 10-second interval is scored yes only when on-task behavior continues for all 10 seconds. Which method is used? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Event recording. Hold the labels for a moment. Match the evidence to the options. The strongest answer is B. Whole interval recording. A yes score requires behavior for the full interval. Whole interval recording uses an all-or-none duration requirement across the interval. The trap is that whole time equals whole interval. A. Partial interval requires only one occurrence. C. Momentary time sampling checks only one moment. D. Event recording counts responses continuously. Whole time equals whole interval. Question 3. A therapist marks an interval yes if hand biting occurs at least once, even for 1 second. Which method is used? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Latency recording. Choose the answer that the exact stem supports, not the one that sounds most familiar. On this stem, select A. Partial interval recording. Any occurrence during the interval produces a yes. Partial interval records whether behavior happened at any point in the interval. The trap is that all during the interval equals partial interval. B. Whole interval requires continuous occurrence. C. Momentary time sampling checks only at a designated moment. D. Latency measures delay to response onset. At all during the interval equals partial interval. Question 4. A behavior occurs briefly in almost every interval. If the partial interval percentage is interpreted as an estimate of percentage duration, which bias is most likely? A. Underestimation of percentage duration. B. Overestimation of percentage duration. C. Exact estimation of percentage duration. D. Measurement of latency. Before the reveal, ask what the stem proves and what it leaves unknown. The evidence supports B. Overestimation of percentage duration. Every brief occurrence turns the entire interval into a yes. Partial interval percentages typically overestimate percentage duration when yes intervals are treated as time engaged. The trap is that partial interval percentage typically overestimates percentage duration. A. Whole interval percentages more typically show this directional bias. C. Partial interval scores do not equal exact percentage duration. D. No cue to response delay is measured. Partial interval percentage typically overestimates percentage duration. Question 5. A student is on task for 9 of every 10 seconds, but each interval contains a brief interruption. Whole interval recording is used. What is likely? A. The whole interval percentage overestimates the percentage duration of on-task behavior. B. The method records exact duration. C. The whole interval percentage underestimates the percentage duration of on-task behavior. D. The method becomes event recording. Take a second pass. What must be true for each option to win? This question resolves to C. The whole interval percentage underestimates the percentage duration of on-task behavior. A brief interruption turns each interval into a no. Whole interval percentages typically understate high, but imperfect sustained engagement relative to continuous percentage duration. The trap is that whole interval percentages typically underestimate percentage duration. A. The typical directional bias is downward, not upward, for percentage duration estimates. B. Exact duration is not measured. D. The scoring rule remains discontinuous. Whole interval percentages typically underestimate percentage duration. Question 6. A BCBA must know the exact number of elopement attempts because each attempt creates immediate safety risk. Which measurement approach best fits? A. Momentary time sampling. B. Partial interval recording. C. Whole interval recording. D. Continuous event recording. Pause and name the decisive relation before you choose. Choose D. Continuous event recording. Every occurrence must be captured accurately. Continuous event recording directly counts each discrete response. The trap is that when every response matters, prefer continuous measurement. A. Momentary time sampling can miss behavior between checks. B. Partial interval loses the exact count. C. Whole interval is poorly matched to brief events. When every response matters, prefer continuous measurement. Question 7. A team needs the total number of minutes a tantrum lasts in each session. Which measure is most direct? A. Duration recording. B. Partial interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Frequency recording. Hold the labels for a moment. Match the evidence to the options. The strongest answer is A. Duration recording. The question asks for total time engaged. Duration directly measures how long behavior lasts. The trap is that select the procedure that preserves the critical dimension. B. Partial interval provides sampled occurrence, not total minutes. C. Momentary time sampling samples moments only. D. Frequency counts episodes, but not their length. Select the procedure that preserves the critical dimension. Question 8. A student leaves the seat for 20 seconds between two timer signals, but is seated at both signals. How will momentary time sampling score those two checks? A. Both checks are yes for out-of-seat behavior. B. One yes and one no. C. The method records 20 seconds. D. Both checks are no for out-of-seat behavior. Choose the answer that the exact stem supports, not the one that sounds most familiar. On this stem, select D. Both checks are no for out-of-seat behavior. The target is absent at both scheduled observation moments. Momentary time sampling ignores what happens between checks when scoring those moments. The trap is that momentary time sampling can miss behavior occurring between observations. A. Occurrence between checks does not create a yes. B. Neither scheduled check captures the target. C. Momentary time sampling does not record exact duration. Momentary time sampling can miss behavior occurring between observations. We are halfway. Notice how the first 8 questions separate the yes rule from the percentage. Then connect sampling bias to measurement fit and continuous observation. If you missed one, name whether you changed the denominator, ignored what happened between checks, or chose a method that cannot preserve the needed dimension. The second half keeps the same routine. Name the rule, identify what it can miss, and match the measure to the decision. Question 9. One teacher must monitor 24 students while teaching. The goal is an estimate of group on-task behavior without continuous observation. Which method is most feasible? A. Continuous duration recording for every student. B. Momentary time sampling at scheduled signals. C. Latency recording after every instruction. D. Permanent product measurement. Before the reveal, ask what the stem proves and what it leaves unknown. The evidence supports B. Momentary time sampling at scheduled signals. The teacher needs brief, scheduled observations across many learners. Momentary time sampling is the most feasible listed method and can provide a representative estimate when checks are sufficiently frequent and appropriately distributed. The trap is that momentary time sampling feasibility still requires sufficiently frequent, well-distributed checks. A. Continuous duration is unrealistic for one teacher and 24 students. C. Latency measures a different dimension. D. No durable product represents on-task behavior. Momentary time sampling feasibility still requires sufficiently frequent, well-distributed checks. Question 10. During one interval, behavior occurs for 2 seconds in the middle and is absent at the end. Which scoring pattern is correct? A. Whole yes, partial yes, momentary time sampling yes. B. Whole no, partial no, momentary time sampling yes. C. Whole yes, partial no, momentary time sampling no. D. Whole no, partial yes, momentary time sampling no. Take a second pass. What must be true for each option to win? This question resolves to D. Whole no, partial yes, momentary time sampling no. Behavior is brief, not continuous, and absent at the check moment. Whole requires the full interval. Partial requires any occurrence. Momentary time sampling uses the endpoint check. The trap is that apply each scoring rule separately to the same interval. A. Whole and momentary time sampling requirements are not met. B. Partial should be yes because behavior occurred. C. Whole cannot be yes when behavior lasted only 2 seconds. Apply each scoring rule separately to the same interval. Question 11. Across a 10-second interval, a learner is engaged for the first 9 seconds and disengaged for the final second. How is the interval scored under whole interval recording? A. Yes, because engagement occupied most of the interval. B. No, because engagement did not last the entire interval. C. Yes, only if the final second is observed. D. The interval is divided into 9 yes scores. Pause and name the decisive relation before you choose. Choose B. No, because engagement did not last the entire interval. 1 second fails the all-interval requirement. Whole interval records yes only when the target persists throughout the complete interval. The trap is that for whole interval, 9 of 10 seconds is still no. A. Most of the interval is not enough. C. Endpoint-only observation describes momentary time sampling. D. One interval receives 1 score. For whole interval, 9 of 10 seconds is still no. Question 12. In one interval, shouting occurs once. In another, it occurs 8 times. Both intervals are scored yes with partial interval recording. Which response count detail cannot be recovered from these 2 scores? A. The exact number of responses within each interval. B. Whether behavior occurred at all. C. Whether the interval had a defined length. D. Which observer collected data. Hold the labels for a moment. Match the evidence to the options. The strongest answer is A. The exact number of responses within each interval. 1 and 8 responses receive the same binary score. Partial interval preserves occurrence, but not within interval frequency. It also loses exact duration. The trap is that a partial interval yes compresses all within interval activity. B. Occurrence is precisely what the yes score preserves. C. Interval duration can still be defined. D. Observer identity is unrelated to the scoring rule. A partial interval yes compresses all within interval activity. Question 13. An observer continuously watches during each 30-second interval, but records yes only if behavior is occurring when the timer sounds. Which procedure is actually defined by the recording rule? A. Partial interval recording. B. Whole interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Continuous duration recording. Choose the answer that the exact stem supports, not the one that sounds most familiar. On this stem, select C. Momentary time sampling. The recorded score depends only on behavior at the scheduled moment. Procedure labels follow the scoring rule, even if the observer happens to watch more than required. The trap is that classify from what creates the data value, not from where the observer looks. A. Partial interval would score any occurrence. B. Whole interval would require continuous occurrence. D. No exact duration is entered. Classify from what creates the data value, not from where the observer looks. Question 14. A brief head strike may occur between scheduled checks, and every occurrence requires an immediate safety response. Which option is most likely to miss these events and is therefore least defensible as the primary measure? A. Continuous event recording. B. A direct count with clear response definitions. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Continuous observation with event recording. Before the reveal, ask what the stem proves and what it leaves unknown. The evidence supports C. Momentary time sampling. A brief event can occur and in between observation moments. Momentary time sampling can miss rare, short, high-risk responses because it samples only scheduled instance. The trap is that sampling risk matters most when missing one event matters clinically. A. Continuous event recording is defensible because it captures each strike, so it cannot be the least defensible option. B. A direct count is defensible because the clear definition supports scoring every strike. It is not the least defensible option. D. Continuous observation with event recording directly detects each strike, so it is not the least defensible option. Sampling risk matters most when missing one event matters clinically. Question 15. One observer reports 60% using partial interval. Another reports 60% using whole interval. Why should the percentages not be treated as interchangeable? A. The procedures use different rules for yes and have different bias patterns. B. Whole and partial interval are mathematically identical. C. Only momentary time sampling produces percentages. D. A percentage automatically equals exact duration. Take a second pass. What must be true for each option to win? This question resolves to A. The procedures use different rules for yes and have different bias patterns. The same percentage comes from different scoring contingencies. Partial records any occurrence. Whole requires occurrence throughout, so their percentages represent different summaries. The trap is that never interpret an interval percentage without its scoring rule. B. The yes rules are not identical. C. All three sampling procedures can yield percentages. D. Interval percentages are not automatically exact duration. Never interpret an interval percentage without its scoring rule. Across these 15 questions, the durable move is to name the scoring rule before interpreting the percentage. Whole interval recording scores yes only when behavior occurs throughout. Partial interval recording scores yes when behavior occurs at any point. Momentary time sampling scores the scheduled instant. Whole and partial percentages usually under or overestimate percentage duration in their typical directions, while momentary sampling may over or underestimate depending on the sampling plan and behavior pattern. Continuous measurement directly captures a temporal or occurrence dimension when that is what the decision requires. Never compare a percentage without its rule. If this lesson helped, keep practicing with our free BCBA mock exam for time questions. Then use our quick study guide to review the relation behind each miss. The links are shown on screen. Subscribe, share the item that made you pause, and return for the next lesson. We are building a clearer BCBA exam library, one deciding detail at a time. Use our quick study guide for a slower pass through the definitions, contrasts, examples, and exam traps from this lesson. The complete guide link is shown on screen, and the free BCBA mock exam is ready when you want to test transfer. We are building a clearer study routine together.